Greetings, dear friends and subscribers to my channel and to Alexey's channels as well. Thank you for following us on both. We are currently doing a live stream on both channels. Alexey, good evening. Good evening, Alexander. Thank you all for chiming in, asking questions, and trying to understand what is really happening. Sometimes it's pretty difficult. Right before this stream, Trump came out to public and made a bunch of promises and interesting comments, and looks like he's rather upset with Zelensky. So, two QR codes. The one that's next to me is allowing you to ask a question, and we'll be asking some of those questions at the end of the stream. You can also join Alexander Shelest in his private channel and support his work there. Let's call it this. And of course, try to ask questions if you have anything that you do want to be asked. QR code next to Alexey is a link to his school of thinking, school of philosophy and logic and psychology. So you probably want to check this out as well. And let's start our today's stream with the usual poll. The question today is whether there will be peace in Ukraine after summit in Alaska. Simple question. And the first answer is yes, there'll be peace right after summit. Second option, yes, it will, but not immediately. Third option, no, the war will continue. And fourth, it will, but after Zelensky is gone. So some of these options are not mutually exclusive, but choose the one that you think is closer to reality. Seems like all sides are preparing for the summit, and the whole event is getting prepared on three sides. So what do you think? Is the glass half empty or half full? I'm trying, Alexander, to create a construct that is not using expletives, but it's difficult. I think that this glass is just odd. And being realistic, we need to understand that it's very non-trivial to plan and explain and predict events at the battlefield. So let's look at the intentions of the sides. Trump and Putin do have intentions to stop this war. By the way, Putin also wants to stop this war. All these stories about him trying to continue it forever are quite far from truth. He mentioned in his conversation with Lukashenko quite recently that he does not want to fight. It is not his story. Frankly, he's not really the warring psychotype. He continues to fight, but his psychotype is about something else. The first department of KGB is about calculating different things behind the closed doors, figuring out different nuance of agreements, and war seems rather blunt to them as a tool. Moreover, in Russia, there are some trends growing that, at the very least, push them towards at least taking a pause. If not going out loud and saying, let's do a ceasefire, but at least taking a big pause. And some of them are economic reasons. Again, nothing is too deadly there. Nothing will break Russia's back in the economy, but the trends are growing. And if they figure out a way to stop some of these trends and getting some bonuses because of this, and hopefully removing some sanctions for them so they could continue make money, then why no, right? Leaders usually do not meet unless they have drafts pre-approved and pre-agreed up to 85% before the meeting. The drafts that they have currently appear to be going in the direction of freezing the front on the current front line, conducting quick elections in Ukraine in rather short terms, and same as Aliyev and Pashinyan are sitting down in presence of Trump to sign the agreement, then Putin and Zelensky can also gather in presence of Trump to sign a contract. Which in this case, by the way, Alexey, there was a talk about, Trump mentioned Zelensky has to sign something. What do you think he will make him sign? A truce, a ceasefire, Alexander. And in the understanding of both Trump and Putin, Zelensky is done with. This is the point where they both agree up to 100%. And for Trump, it's pretty simple. He needs to close the war. He's trying to present himself as a peacemaker from Congo to Azerbaijan to Ukraine and Russia. And he needs to present himself as a candidate for a Nobel Peace Prize. Otherwise, there'll be some consequences for this war that is still lasting, and America is facing Congress elections soon, so they need to come to some result in this matter. Then let's take Zelensky. Zelensky does not like neither Trump's statements nor Putin's statements, because for him this is political death. Probably physical death too, but political death for sure. And everything beyond that is very undefined, which can vary from exile, from living somewhere outside Ukraine, from criminal prosecution, from a lot of other options. And a lot of professional Ukrainians who will not forgive him, like Soros battalions and alike, and very right-leaning Ukrainians, very nationalistic type Ukrainians will not forgive him for signing anything with Trump and Putin. At the same time, the other half of Ukraine is also not going to support him if he continues this war. So he is like a deer in the headlights, and he is a hostage of his own politics that he was conducting for the last 3.5 years. He was trying his best to be liked by all three categories, by professional Ukrainians, by Soros networks, by nationalist battalions. He was presenting himself as their significant leader, and he did affect a lot of rights that Ukrainians used to have. And unfortunately, it did not help him much. Now he is still between two different lights, and symbolically, this is reflected in the fact that he's not being officially invited to Alaska. He did mention somewhere that there will be a trilateral meeting. Then he mentioned that it'll be a bilateral meeting and he'll be present somewhere. And then Trump came out and said, you know what, Zelensky's presence is not really necessary for this meeting. And he blatantly said that Zelensky is not going to be an active participant in this meeting. Right, Alexei, there was a note somewhere that Trump mentioned that if he wants, he can fly to Alaska. But what Ukrainian media is not continuing to translate is that he said that Zelensky was flying for 3 years already and did not lead to anything. So if he wants to, he can come. Right, Alexander, like proper politics, you never say no, you just give a sign, give a hint that his presence will not be necessary. Meantime, Europe and UK have quickly rigged up a meeting and expressed their joint opinion that they do not like what is happening. They do not like Putin. They do not like Trump. They are still supporting Zelensky. We do not know exactly Chinese and Indian position, but given the pressure that Trump is exerting on both countries, again, both of them are probably for a ceasefire and finishing this war, but European mantras about Ukraine returning to its original borders are probably not shared as a point by China and India. So what we're facing now, Zelensky likely will not accept what Putin and Trump will agree about. And Trump already made a statement that there likely will be some interesting outcome of this meeting. The matter is that he cannot accept it. The problem for Zelensky then is what he will use to continue paying for this war. Where will he take money? We already are facing over $40 billion deficit for next year, and most part of Ukrainian money is coming from the United States as support. And here Vance comes again and says, you know what, we're stopping any monetary support of Ukraine. Trump already is reacting with a maximum negativity to Zelensky as much as possible, according to the protocol. But Zelensky is definitely not welcome in Trump's office. So we'll see. It'll be interesting what suggestion, what offer will Trump and Putin come up with after their meeting. Zelensky I'm predicting, will likely not be receptive, and then we will see what will happen with Zelensky after that. Alexei, it seems like it's a rather dangerous rhetoric trick here. Look, Putin, full-scale invasion of Russia, Russian troops under Kiev, yet some protests or some veterans throwing their medals at his office will, as you're saying, probably push him out. Well, yeah, problem is that Brussels, EU are standing behind the protests against Zelensky. And if Zelensky is not going to do what EU and Britain would like, he'll be announced to be next Yanukovych in Ukraine. So those sides that were usually supporting him, they're not supporting him anymore. Problem is that Soros battalions and the nationalist battalions, they are somewhat interested in continuation of conflict, because without a conflict, their influence significantly diminishes. How will they push Zelensky out? That is a big question. But there are other people who understood that being upset and expressing your upsetness about Zelensky, it is okay. You can already conduct another Maidan in Ukraine and express your concerns about Zelensky's rule, and that's acceptable. Alexei, it appears that politically in Ukraine, besides those Soros battalions and Zelensky, who are trying to hug each other politically and be one in their aspirations, there is no other politics in Ukraine. Well, when you were saying about revolting against Zelensky's regime, whom is that revolting about? Whom is that addressed to? Remember when we talked about so-called cardboard Maidan, when people were upset with Zelensky in different cities in Ukraine, they simultaneously came out to streets, to squares in different cities. Now imagine that repeating on a bigger scale. When Zelensky is being called a usurper, a dictator, and somebody on these protests may come out and say that Zelensky is a corruptionaire. They don't even have to come out with the slogans that we want peace. They can come out with the slogan that Zelensky is corrupt. Especially if that happens on the backdrop when Trump says that we cannot work with Zelensky, and he very likely will make similar to the statement after Zelensky refuses to accept results of Trump and Putin's meeting. So it is interesting to see what will happen in Ukraine after, and who will be the figure that will support Trump's and Putin's efforts in Alaska. Alexei, what do they imply when they say exchange of territories? Alexander, there will be no exchange of territories. Russia will perhaps give Kharkov and Zaporozhye and Kherson districts. Completely? Yes, completely. They will likely conduct referendum, other mechanisms. I have always said that the scale of Putin's steps and what he will likely suggest for Ukraine to have will surprise people. So this is probably a time when we will see it rather soon. What is happening in Alaska, that they will discuss the intentions, and they likely will discuss Donetsk and Lugansk, ownership of complete ownership of those districts, in exchange for those districts where they will remove themselves from, and they will likely add sanctions removal to the package. Why, do you think? Well, because holding territories that are not keen on having you as a ruler is difficult. They take money. It takes a lot of efforts to control them when there is partisan movements and local citizens are against you. Now, for Russia, it is also a critical time that they were planning to use Norwegian, American, and other European technologies to continue oil excavations in the Arctic region. Now this is all closed for them, but it's critical. So they're eager to figure something out on a global scale in order to restore that. Plus, China purchasing oil from Russia is not as profitable as it appeared to be initially. So if they can find a peaceful way to trade with old and new customers, if they can find a way to trade their sanctions for giving back some of the occupied territories. Now, again, this does not mean that this is 100%. This is the options that are being discussed, preliminary. And most likely, it'll be a freezing across the current front line with many other things happening after. And concessions on both sides. But however you try to make this pill sweet, it's still a bitter pill for Ukraine to swallow. And the focus after that will be on Ukraine, how our population will figure it out, who will be the next political figure to lead Ukraine in the next period. And this is to pay more attention, I would suggest, than whatever is now appearing in the media about withdrawing troops and Russia withdrawing from Ukraine or Ukraine withdrawing from some parts. No, this is likely not going to happen in the near future. But even in a more promising option for Ukraine, the most promising draft that the Trump and Putin can come with, it is not acceptable for Zelensky still. Plus, there's something that needs to be done with Britain and with Europeans. Right, Alexei? I wanted to talk about those two players as well. How ready are they to participate in this? Well, it's visible the last years, Alexander. The problem is that the real support for Ukraine in the volume that is needed for successful resistance to Russia, not even advancing, but at least orderly retreat, Europe does not have the resources to support that. They do not have money to support our budget. If it takes them about a year to figure out more ammo or a couple more Patriots to give to Ukraine, what are we talking about? When all of the European countries are saying that they will not send their troops to Ukraine, they'll just continue helping from afar. And also, given that about 85% of European arms have American components, America can veto these supplies at any moment. So Europe technically cannot provide necessary support volume to Ukraine. But in a very dual-faced fashion, they can be saying out of one corner of the mouth one thing and the other from the other. And they can still come out to the stage and promise that they will support Ukraine, they will stand with Ukraine, yet technically they're incapable of supporting these words. If somebody gets joy from listening to that, great, but it does not help Ukrainian troops somewhere near Dobropolye, where Russians pushed in for 10 kilometers and cut the road, Dobropolye-Kramatorsk road. So we'll talk about the map later, Alexei, right? Therefore, Alexander, I think we have this story. We have only one player who can give enough resources to fund Ukraine's resistance to Russian aggression, and they're not going to. The other group in Ukraine can only say that we'll fight to the last Ukrainian when there is no support, but this still does not have any perspective. All right, I still keep your words, Alexei, that Putin's concessions may be rather great, rather surprising. Well, they'll be surprising in terms of realpolitik. He'll be following realpolitik to the T, I think, Alexander. Well, still, I want to discuss with you, Alexei, the square kilometers, in this case, square miles. If to just take a model that Putin is ready to go for many things, he's ready for different concessions to get to a ceasefire point, to be able to work in the future with America and Alaska and Arctic oil mining. And you can read more on the topic. You can look up The Economist publications about the money that Russia is looking to raise on exploitation of Arctic resources. This is for those who like to go deep into the rabbit holes with tasty analytics, with prices and volumes, etc. Quite surprising. I have another question though. How generous can Putin be in the ideological, in their philosophic demands to Kiev regime and the project anti-Russia? Well, this matter is likely going to be solved on the next phase, Alexander, with the new leadership of Ukraine, because elections will happen not for nothing. They likely will be discussing, and Trump will likely agree to that all sanctions have to be removed from all the Zelensky's opposition, that everybody has to be allowed to run for next president's position, which generally prepares an opportunity to bring new bloods into parliament, into presidential office, who have different view on the future of Ukraine, on our project, different from the Ukrainian insurgency army dugout. And there is another component that people usually miss, and those who try to talk about that, they will usually get cold names. This is the size of a real opposition, not to war and Zelensky government, but to the Ukrainian insurgency army dugout, to the narrow project. How big resistance is and opposition is to that project. People who are opposing to the vector of Ukraine being anti-Russia. We don't know exactly the volume, the size of this group. We'll see them on the elections, because in elections there likely will be two groups ultimately running against each other. The party of war, where all the nationalists, all the Soros networks and the like will continue pushing for. A lot of politicians will also stay in the party of war because it's very short time window to change your shoes in flight, change your dress in flight, and go for a different goal. And the party of peace. Who will lead that party of peace and how many people will support them? That's interesting. And here's what we'll likely face. If the party of peace prevails, depending how many votes they get in the parliament, they will have to face a difficult problem of changing the projectivity of Ukraine on the go. They will have to allow Eastern Orthodox Church, they will have to allow Russian language, they will have to allow a lot of things that Putin was demanding on his side. And that will also create a situation where they will have to stop prosecuting people who do not agree with the narrow project. So this is a difficult construct, different task to solve. Now, if the party of war prevails in the elections, they will probably continue the conflict for another year, maybe a year and a half, because they have to continue fighting and they will not be able to continue fighting. So they will try to expand the drafting ages, both upward and downward, and very likely they will not be able to support social payments and pensions and medical stuff to the population, and they will lose rather quickly because Putin will likely not go for any agreements with that government. And then Ukraine will likely fall into another turbulence and will have likely more extreme groups forming in the country, pushing back as well as going to fight for the last Ukrainian. But Alexei, we're talking about that option without Zelensky. Oh yeah, Alexander, Zelensky will not be on a political stage in very short term. So now a question, what will the Ukrainians vote for? And whom will they vote for? And whether there will be any elections, because there is also another scenario where the fire is taken out on Bankova Street, then somebody comes from London on a beautiful helicopter and talks with Tymoshenko, Beletsky, and Budanov, and between the four of them, they figure out some new form of power. But this new power will still not be able to strike a ceasefire with Russia. They will continue to fight. And then they'll run out of money for war, money for social services, and they'll be done with not only by Putin on the front, although he will play a significant role and will continue crumbling the front, but they'll be killed ultimately as a regime by the grandmas who will be out in the streets protesting that they have no money to eat to buy food, and they'll have no medical services. And there's nothing you can do with the grannies on the streets. You cannot put them all in jail. And these are two options, right? The party of war, the party of peace. Party of peace is also interesting. There are different undertones there. There is a group that says that we still want to go and join NATO in the party of peace, which likely will not get enough support. Right, Alexei, there was an interesting story when Trump, if you translate that rhetoric to a common language, everybody might start understanding why Arestovych is picking words so that he would not be using expletives. When Trump is publicly making statements that Zelensky is discussing that he needs to get constitutional agreement in order to give any territory or sign anything with invading Russia, yet he's asking whether Zelensky then does have a permission to fight and kill more Ukrainians in this war. So he has right, Alexander, to disband constitutional court, to take away people's rights in Ukraine. Internally, he is almighty, but externally, he cannot do that, right? So he is concerned, Zelensky is concerned with the numbers and that he will have to take this political death as a result of the events happening. So once again, not every party of peace is worthy. And we understand what the party of war would want to do, but the party of peace that still wants to go for NATO, the one that still wants to restore the borders back in 91, this party of peace will likely just reignite the war again. The party of peace that we need is the one that will be changing the projectivity of Ukraine to a neutral country, to a big neutral multicultural country that will be accepted on all sides, and that Ukraine, technically, when announced its direction of joining NATO, it violated its own Charter of Independence that they declared early when they were formed. So technically, somebody can bring up a legal question, like somebody like Putin, and say, well, you're violating your own charter by leaning towards NATO. So you are essentially debunking the statehood of your country by these actions. And he may have some case for this. So, unfortunately, this was a very horrible step for Ukraine to sign in NATO and itself as an anti-Russia into a constitution. Just the act of going that way, that vector, undermined the original charter of Ukraine. When they added NATO and EU into their constitution, Ukraine delegitimized its existence. Some people may now bring it up on the banner and say, well, you do not have Ukraine that originally was chartered, that chartered itself. So that's why we need a different party of peace that will go to the basics and will try to restore a neutral statehood for Ukraine. And I will not even go deeper into the fact that the highest mastership for politicians would be to figure out a peace with all its neighbors. And one can bring some good examples from Middle East, like Egypt and Jordan, who are still the parties in signing the Abrahamic Accords. And we'll see what the party of peace will be in Ukraine after the 15th of August. That'll start to define itself better and better. And that's why, once again, not every party of peace is useful, friends. All those listeners, please pay attention. The party of peace that does not want to expand Ukrainian project, the party of peace that does not want to find good relations with its neighbors on both sides, is the party of extended conflict. They're not the true party of peace. Here, Alexei, I want to bring up some of the clips that are permeating Ukrainian media. The series they are in Azov battalion. Can they be considered already a start of election campaign? Oh yeah, they definitely are part of it. You can see here's another little piece from that Azov propaganda. This is the party of war that is trying to gain some popularity. in the face of looming elections. That's why, again, all these statements by different media personas, how amazingly Third Army Corps had stabilized the front segment, how fantastic their commanders are, the interviews with Budanov, the praise from Zaluzhny, one can read that there is an order that Zelensky will be replaced, and all these groups are reforming itself, but it still remains to be a party of war. So what will be with Zelensky, Alexei, in your view? Many people broadcasting their upset, their negativity about all that. By the way, one of the very popular streams in social media, what they're doing now, they take Zelensky clips from 2022 when he was still in civil suit, in a business suit and official clothes, and they're mixing them with his current statements. And it looks interesting how he changed his rhetoric from the original to what we have in Zelensky's statements these days. And this is not done, I guess, for nothing, right? I think it already creates the situation where Zelensky will not be able to just quietly go into the forest. Alexander, the destiny of Zelensky, in light of what is going to happen with Ukraine, is not so important. However, on a personal level, I definitely feel sorry for him because this is a fiasco. Whether it will end up with a plane that falls out of the sky, or some prosecution and criminal punishment, or perhaps a quiet exile somewhere, but he is facing a political end. Not as a triumph figure like Mannerheim, who saved Finland, but it will be likely a very negative exit with a lot of corruption, a lot of things, a lot of errors done by his government pinned on him personally and his close managers. Because a lot of things could have been stopped back in 2022 on the early negotiation step, and a lot of people would have stayed alive. But his destiny will be rather grim in any case. All right, if we try to pick some details here, Alexander, at best his destiny will be similar to Mikhail Saakashvili's, at best. Well, not a given though, right? Yeah, not a given, because Mikhail has not done so many things that Zelensky did, and in the volumes as such. Today, Goncharenko made a statement that on the tapes from Mindich's apartment, there was a discussion about how to park, and that's the quote from Zelensky, how to park 5 billion euros. And surprising, right? Remember, there were some rumors about Zelensky's close circle trying to purchase a bank. And you remember how propaganda in the Ukraine was tearing their shirts and with the foam at their mouths were trying to say that, no, this is all Putin's propaganda, this is no real. Apparently, the tapes from Mindich apartment do talk about purchasing a bank in France. Goncharenko comes out and says, indeed, in order to park a big amount in cryptocurrency, up to 5 billion euros, it does make sense to purchase a bank. That's easier. So this is a rather shocking admission of this thing. And some people are laughing and saying, well, Macron, given the fact that he likes to hug Zelensky, perhaps he can help him with purchasing that bank. Well, listen, even without Goncharenko, one can take a look at the press publications in EU. Even during the cardboard Maidan, Zelensky was named a corruptioneer. And it has grown 12 times in his presence. Corruption in Ukraine has grown 12 times. There are dozens of publications of leading, even European media that are generally very supportive of Ukraine. In the first 30 of the world media, you can find that. That's why the label is already on him. I don't think he can wiggle away from it. In Ukraine, they're somewhat comparing him with Yanukovych among the youth, but in EU, they're already calling him a corruptioneer. And I did talk to some bankers. The story is rather concerning, especially about the adequacy of people who think that this could have been done if indeed Zelensky's environment was thinking that that's an option, because that's not how banks work. It's not the way to to launder 5 billion euros. But the fact remains that there are millions and billions of money stolen from Ukrainian soldiers, the money that were made on their blood. So we do not know how much of the material will become available, but we can see that cardboard Maidan in Ukraine had already happened even without much publications. People were already coming out of the streets protesting the corruption. So the situation is already rather fiery, where people are ready to come out to the streets and criticize the regime that is leading the country in fight. So Zelensky is already named a corruptioneer, even before all publications are made in the Western media. Second is, we'll see how technically will it be realized. He may fly somewhere on his blue helicopter, but chances are he will be removed one way or the other from power. And you do not need very often to give all detailed printouts of the tapes. For many people, it's just enough to know that they exist. Alexey, let's go back to one interesting thought. I want to unite those clips, we in Azov from the nationalistic right, and situation we see on the streets where a bloodied man is saying goodbye to his wife in the drafting commission hall. And all the infighting happening between the drafting commission chasing Ukrainians on the streets and people fighting back. So somebody asked Trump whether Ukraine can win over Russia, and he said that it's a dumb question. And he is continuing to say that America had participated in defeating most dictators like Hitler and successfully done it, leading the world in this. So I want to catch this thought. The change of projectivity for Ukraine is being presented, drawn into the mass conscience of Ukrainians by the volume of losses and the territories, and propaganda was really pushing the narrative that signing anything with Russia is going under Russia again. Well, Alexander, this is how the party of war understands it. The Soros networks, the nationalist battalions, part of those on the front, and professional Ukrainians, that's definitely a force. That's some of the election force in these elections. But how self-propelled is this force? How independent are they? How long can they exist without support of, let's say, American money, if they completely are left without money? And when other orders are given from Europe or United States, they have handlers or they have structures that they really are dependent upon because they're their sponsors. So just placing the statement that their vector is joining Europe, they are limiting themselves. And the Ukrainian right is a bit more about independence of Ukraine. They are, unlike Soros networks, they're not for being supported by UK or EU. They want to be independent. However, and even though they're holding 120, 150 kilometers of the front, bravely, the moment they run out of ammo, that'll make their task much harder. So that's why I'm turning to people who are going to support the party of peace, the party of large project in Ukraine. It will be difficult. And the problem is not in the party of war. The problem was that Zelensky's office was creating propaganda that coincided with and was supporting the party of war. But Zelensky also faces another problem because he had done everything he could to be liked, yet he cannot go with this party now anymore. And the question is, how long will they remain? That's a question. The party of war, will they be able to withstand any pressure when the money dries up, when they start to be targeted with certain sanctions? We don't know. Still, I want to send a message to our Ukrainians that the party of war may win. Same as the party of change of projectivity, it may win too. Despite of all the corruption, despite of all the propaganda and everything, if the global decision is made, and on the 15th we'll see what happens, we will see that if somebody will be resisting to that conclusion, to that vector, to that decision, Trump and the United States will likely not be supporting the party of war in this case, and Zelensky and his government. So there are good chances for the party of peace to win. Well, Alexei, there are wolves in sheepskin still in Ukraine, right? Oh, we will deal with those too. Why do you think Russia is not playing these games? Alexei, which games? Well, let me clarify that question. Good. It's fascinating. 8,500 people whom Ukrainian government added to the sanctioned lists for different reasons, ideological, political. Right, exactly, Alexander, don't be shy. You and I are part of those lists, of those 8,500 people. It took me a while to understand the scale of all this effort with the Zelensky government, Alexei. And I understand, okay, maybe part of this list indeed was working for Putin, right? And targeting some things or giving him information, etc. But 8,500, really? Why our government adding us to these ridiculous lists? Is Russia not playing these games? Why is it only Ukraine doing it? Well, no, Alexander. In Russia, I think they have already 2 or 3 criminal prosecutions against me. I don't know about you, but if we had smart people on both sides of the border, there would be no war. And I understand we criticize Ukraine here, right? We're Ukrainians, so we criticize Ukraine. We know our country better. But we can criticize Russia. If they were our target audience, you could point out a lot of elements like Mishkovshina, like Tuzla. They had a ton of events that were not smart. Yet all that disappears as fog in the right moment. Why? Because in Russia, unlike Ukraine, the situation is more manageable. This is a very uncomfortable problem for those who are very anti-Russia in their mindset. Russia is still quite an independent country. It is managed and independent from the West country. Yes, it is more complex, and it does have some flair of czar and slaves, right? Some people like to present it this way. But still, Russia is manageable. For example, unsolvable task of leaving Zaporozhye and Kherson districts, which they have added to their constitution. Russia has mechanisms. Yeah, they added it to their constitution, but they can conduct a referendum, which can be one level higher than that constitution. They can change constitution with that. So Russia can organize referendums in those districts that they occupy to remove them from Russian constitution if they need to. So they have capacity to change their politics, to change their vector, and they have tools to solve these things. Putin is a legal animal. He speaks legalese, so he will figure a way to do that. Oh, Alexei, I know we'll have a lot of attacks on us after these statements, but so don't forget, please, to click the like button. That's important. There'll be a lot of people criticizing us and this scenario that you just voiced. I'm also a little skeptical about the published scenario that Crimea and Donbass with Lugansk districts remain with Russia, yet Russia liberates other territories that it occupied. I'm skeptical that they will liberate, they will vacate those territories, but I see you are rather logically describing the working mechanism, how it can work. That they already have some senators coming out and saying that, we do not need Kherson as a city in Russia. We can just have a piece of Kherson district, and we can say that this is Kherson district, so we don't need to change or do any referendum on it. Right, exactly. There could be 2 Zaporozhye districts. And they could be Russian Zaporozhye district, a piece of our original one, and Ukraine will have the other piece of it. Or Kherson district without Kherson city. So we are not legal animals. Putin lives and breathes legalese. If he was not a legal animal, he would not be even asking his Council of Federation for permission to conduct this war, which he did, and he got. So they will find a way to describe that and to describe the mechanism and to use these mechanisms to be able to finish this war in the way they want to. If there is a ceasefire, right? So they will find a way to resolve this matter with Kherson and Zaporozhye districts. I understand that they will find a way to do it. How? These are details. Oh, and I understand, Alexei, that all the norms of international law, they're void, right? Oh yeah, absolutely, they're void. This war just voided most of them anyway. All right, let's go to the map. Let's go to the map and take a look at the situation on the front now. And I want to discuss the situation on the front with Maryana Bezuglya. She brought a medical document that states that she cannot tolerate what she thinks or considers to be lies. And she is using it now to support her statements. Our big victory, by the way, if you have not noticed, a village in Sumy district, Bessalna, it's on the border, somewhere near Totkina, for those who understand where the map is. I'll show it on the map. That village was liberated, supposedly. And then Maryana Bezuglya comes out and says that, wait, not in a single document published by the General Command of Ukraine, this village doesn't even exist. Legally, yes, we liberated it, supposedly to the statements, but legally it was not occupied. Legally it doesn't quite exist. And also, meantime, she indicates that there is a Russian breakthrough on the front near Dobropolye, and they already cut the road. Remember, Alexei, I was trying to torture you and you tried to avoid my detailed questions and you tried to go deeper into philosophy. I tried to poke you on the matter of what is the collapse of the front, what it would look like. I think that today the road between Kramatorsk and Dobropolye, captured by Russia, that is a crumbling of the front. No, this is a breakthrough. This is not a collapse. There is no military definition for the front collapse. Politically and ideologically, the collapse of the front would be when you have 4 different breakthroughs like that in different sides of the front, and one can say that the front is collapsing. If these breakthroughs will not be culled, will not be resolved somehow. For now, we have just one breakthrough like this. If there'll be 2 or 3 more, we can start talking that the front is starting to collapse. And we can use that not as a scientific, but as more of an ideological term or political term. If, as you can see on the map, breakthrough like that will not be able to be resolved by Ukrainian troops. Today, one of the military or near-military bloggers who was saying that today, according to some data, Ukrainian army has more people who voluntarily left their detachment than the ones who are fighting. The problem of Ukraine is not UAVs, not arms, but soldiers, life force. And the problem with that is that the way it is used is very ineffective, and it also keeps running away and fleeing the locations where they do not see reasonable to hold. So in such a situation, despite the bravery and the will of soldiers who are still fighting and the competence of their commanders, it is very difficult to maintain the front. Even if we had all soldiers equal to, or officers equal to Alexander Macedonsky and Napoleon, and every soldier would be a Terminator, with the number of soldiers we have fighting, the front would still be collapsing. Listen that. Hear that. And since far from all soldiers are Terminators and far from all commanders in Ukraine are Alexander Makedonsky's, Alexander the Great's, the collapse of some parts of the front is triple inevitable. That's why these two legs that you can see on the map, this could be the first one, right, for 10 kilometers, but not the last ones. Do you think Pokrovsk will stand till the end of summit? No, in general, but yeah, till summit they will survive. But looking at this situation up north, I think their situation is pretty dire. That pincer above Pokrovsk, a month ago, it did not exist. There was nothing to predict that they will be breaking through there. Yet we do not have enough people on many positions. For example, if you have a soldier for 100, 150, 240 days on the front, this is beyond human capability. I do not understand how are they still fighting. I mean, I understand how they're physically fighting, but that does not bring any good things to the front, to the stability of the front. Alexey, many times in our streams also, you did talk about that balcony and that, oh yeah, it's called operative balcony over here near Zoom. Situation in Kupyansk is rather horrible, and most likely they will occupy that. And that implies that our forces that are east of Borovaya will likely be surrounded and perhaps fall into the cauldron. So Kupyansk, Toretsk, Konstantinovka, this is the wave where Russian army and Serebryanskoye forestry district, that's where our forces will likely have to withdraw with a very high probability, I would say 98%, that they'll have to go behind the Black Stallion area. And this was one of the key elements that precluded Russian groups from joining. So the moment they move back is when Russia will have more forces available because they will not have to hold it on two sides. But we may observe in the next month or two 4 big cauldrons slamming on the front. The map will be more preferential for Russia in this case and very horrible for Ukraine, or less pleasant for Ukraine if we're speaking diplomatese here. But situation on the front will also be very visible in the social media and the posts, and you will see that upset of Ukrainian society at this situation will be looking for a way to steam, to vent. Some Vladimir Alexandrovich is already on the position of the one to blame, and very soon certain negative elements happening on the front will be added to the current corruption charges. And this is the recipe of a cocktail that may blow up Ukraine internally, and then you don't even need to investigate 5 billions of cryptocurrency further. This will be enough to raise people against the government. Today, Alexey, there are a couple more interesting things. This breakthrough is a significant news. Everybody were thinking about this lower area, that likely things will be happening here. Remember, Alexander, when I was talking about some Russian breakthroughs on the front about a year ago, when I started talking about them breaking through and crumbling some parts of our defense, I meant these things like that. All right, Alexey, I want to comment more about the balconies and the events happening now. I think the first breakthrough was near Serebryanskoye forestry for the 10 kilometers. It was acknowledged, not acknowledged, and then forgotten, right? Because it's forest, who cares? But this breakthrough down south is different, and it's strategic, and it has an influence on Konstantinovka, Drushkovka, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, which understandably they will be spending a lot more time if they try to fight it and occupy the city itself. I will tell you more, Alexander. Looking at where the Russian reserves are concentrating, I think they've made a decision. Remember, a couple of streams ago, we could not define which one will be in priority, Kramatorsk or Zaporozhye. And now we can see that they're concentrating their forces down south here and on Zaporozhye. Unless it is an element of strategic intelligence, they are trying to create a pincer on the connection between Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye districts. And they will give themselves enough of the area to, that area, to operate near Zaporozhye city and to capture the balance of Zaporozhye district as much as they can. And for me, it was a dilemma how they will do that. But this breakthrough actually answers another important question for us. And the breakthrough in Kupyansk and Serebryanskoye forestry, it tells us that Russian command reasonably is basing their estimations on the conclusion that they have enough forces on the front, given the condition of the forces that resisting their advancements, that they can continue pushing on 4 directions without having to sacrifice one of them. Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk at the bottom, second Kramatorsk-Slaviansk, third Izium, fourth is Serebryanskoye forestry. This is basically the whole front, Alexei, right? Oh yeah, it is the whole front. It is very uncomfortable news for Ukraine. I cannot not ask the next question, Alexei. I think you understand why. So, what with these counterattacks of Syrsky that we heard about? We apparently knocked on some doors in Bryansk, not too successfully, but we tried, before Trump and Putin meeting. I don't know what the New York taxi drivers and Washington drivers are telling to Alexei, but I hear 2 options. That Zelensky was gathering his inner circle, and he was trying to send a message that we need to prepare for peace and we need to find a way out. That's one message. And another group is saying that, no, he was gathering them to try to generate something unusual, something unexpected that would affect the meeting of Trump and Putin in Alaska, something that can spoil that meeting. What do you think about Zelensky and the steps he can make? Well, could have been 2 different circles and 2 different conversations, Alexander. You could see how his inner circle and enforcement agencies would react to the statement that the war may end soon. So he could have made the statement in the inner circle, and then the court would listen to what the inner circle is saying when they're going to saunas and drinking with them and going to different events. So Americans are considering that there may be some provocations tied to that summit, tied to that meeting of Putin and Trump. Perhaps another drone that flies into some Chernobyl nuclear power station. Remember back during the Munich Conference of Security that I was attending, how people were trying to peddle that similar situation, but it didn't fly. So what is the concerning thing for Ukraine? The concerning thing is that if the war will be somehow wrapped up, there'll be a ceasefire implemented, the stable perch that these people, party of war, used to rely upon will disappear immediately. If they would use a way to slowly close the front with slow retreat, that is one situation. However, if the funds are out and ammo is not there, the front will start collapsing right in front of the eyes, and that will dismantle all the rhetoric that we can handle Russian invasion even on our own. So the main stool that this party of war is standing about, that Russia will fall apart, that is predicted by economists like Lipsitz, that Russia will fall apart and perhaps run away all the way to Vladivostok. The next few months may show that, Russia is still fighting somehow, and Ukrainian troops are getting caught in cauldrons and becoming prisoners of war somehow. So if the ceasefire doesn't happen immediately, the next few months will dismantle the rhetoric for the party of war that the front will not be able to collapse. The collapsing front will change their rhetoric. This factor did not exist for the last 3 years. But if it starts happening more rapidly, this will change the feeling of war that our citizens have. Right, Alexei. I'm seeing some analytics here. One of the experts is quoting that almost everywhere there are breakthroughs. Kupyansk, Stepnogorsk, Golden Well. Some people are saying that Russian diversion groups are entering or gray zone is expanding, but all the pockets, all the cauldrons are likely to be shut, one after another. And the whole front eventually will look as a more straightened line. Do you think Ukrainians are ready for defeat? No, of course not, because for that they would have to to go through one impossible thing. They need to acknowledge that they have been wrong these 3 years, which is mostly impossible. Most people prefer to die than to acknowledge that they've been wrong. One needs a lot of bravery to acknowledge that he's been wrong. More bravery than you need to even continue fighting on the front. Civilian bravery costs a lot more than military bravery, especially in a situation when the loudest ones are screaming for continuation of this war. And what surprises me as I'm observing this event, how many people are on both sides of the front who are refusing to acknowledge that they've been wrong. Just to acknowledge that I was wrong on something. But life treats them, reality cures them. Arestovych and Shelest can be beeping something here, these scoundrels that have sold their souls to devil, but the life itself will likely change them, the people's point of view, much faster than we can here. So the last 2.5, 3 years seems like Arestovych is only talking about some fears that are not likely to happen. The last 2 years, right, since I left the administration. But the changes are accumulating gradually, but realizing rapidly. And for 2 years, people were quite sure that Arestovych is wrong about predicting things. And now they're seeing with their own eyes that these predictions actually are happening. And they're about to start asking themselves the question, how come? Russia was supposed to collapse economically, and instead we are failing. We were expecting for Putin to call for ceasefire because he cannot advance any further. Yet we're losing the silver forestry, we're losing Kupyansk, and we're about to lose Kramatorsk. They're operatively already in semicircle. And a big fist is going towards Zaporozhye city with the perspective of cutting it away from the rest of Ukraine and surrounding the city. And perhaps something may continue happening in Kherson. And the situation there is also difficult. Russians started the operation on isolating certain parts of a district from another, which looks like a situation where they try to split the Kherson city into parts and start their military operations there. Perhaps even tactical, but already on the right bank. And then, what's happening? Arestovych and Shelest were correct, and I have to acknowledge that I was wrong, that I was laughing at him, and I was wrong at that. No, people usually are not brave enough to acknowledge their mistakes like that. People are usually weak. And all the treachery and continuation of this war is using it as a fertile ground, that weakness. Ukrainians have a ton of military courage, and they completely lack civilian courage these days. End of the first hour.